So now I'm going to give you the secret to freelance success. And it's one word: clarity. So the secret to being successful, to reaching your goals, is to actually understand them. So to understand what it is you're hoping to achieve. And that may be different for every person in this room. If you're freelancing on the side because you want to tell stories that you can't tell in your day job, then you may not care so much about how much you're getting paid. If you're like me and you have a mortgage and childcare and other expenses, you actually have to really think about the pay and the hourly rate that you're getting. So for every single project I take on, for every single new client, I think about, why am I doing this? And I have a little, I have a three P's rule, that I'm either doing something because it pays well, I'm doing it for the prestige, or it's building my resume, it's helping me get to where I want to go, or I'm doing it for personal fulfillment, because this is just a story I can't wait to tell, I'm really engaged with it, and I don't care so much about the other two. And hopefully any assignment has all three of these, or at least two. But you need to keep the reason in the forefront of your mind as you're doing the work. Has anyone seen the movie Miller's Crossing? Okay, must see. It's one of my favorite movies. It's a Coen Brothers film about Chicago gangsters, and the main character, Tommy, is having a conversation with his mentor, Leo, and Leo says, well, you know, Tommy, you do anything to help your friends, just like you do anything to hurt your enemies. And Tommy says, no, you do things for a reason. And I'd like to know what that reason is. So this is something that has really helped me over the last 6 years to know when I start why I'm doing something. And then as the project goes along, if suddenly I took something for pay and it's taking me 3 times as long as I intended or expected, that is not a good project anymore. I mean, I'm going to continue my commitment, I'm going to do what I agreed to do, but I may not work for that client again. And unless you're doing that assessment along the way, you can easily end up saying, well, it's work, I'll just do it, it doesn't matter if it's good or not. But you need that reason. Otherwise you end up on the, just working and working to live instead of really living your work. And it's business. So don't get caught up in the emotions of guilt or wanting to work for this person or feeling scared. It really has to be this clarity, to be clear in your own mind about what you're doing and why. So the common questions I often get, or that often come up in gatherings of freelancers, are these 3. How do you find clients? How much do you charge? And how do you protect yourself? So if I could get another show of hands, who has been in journalism for less than 3 years, or you're still in school? Okay, thanks for coming. And who has been in journalism for more than 3 years? Okay, you all already know everyone you need to get freelance clients. Everyone you've ever worked with is a potential lead to a client. And anyone that you even know in your community can potentially be a lead to a client. One of my steady clients right now that I do ghostwriting for was referred to me by a middle school friend. So either I was a really brilliant 11-year-old writer, or the connections that we have can really be helpful, as long as we know to put it out there what we're looking for. So another thing that's really helpful to find clients, there's 3 resources that you may not be aware of. Media Bistro, if anyone's familiar with the website, they have some wonderful series of articles on how to pitch certain publications. They dissect a pitch letter to show what parts of it worked. They actually look at successful freelance pitches and say, why did the editor assign this story? The American Society of Journalists and Authors is a fabulous professional association for independent nonfiction writers, so book and periodical writers. And then the writer's market. When I first started, it was a book, a huge book with listings of every single publication on earth and what their freelance terms are. And I think they now have an online resource as well. And that's actually how I got my first byline. I sent an article to, I think, 50 different, sequentially, one after the other, until I finally got published. So these are the 3 questions I'm going to address today. And as I go along, please feel free to jump in if you have a comment to add, if you had an experience that relates, if you have a question or something seems unclear. I'm really happy for this to be a back and forth discussion. So as we talk about clients, one of the most important things that we always say in my gatherings of freelancers is, who is your anchor client? And the anchor client is sort of the holy grail of freelancing, someone that you do not have to pitch, you do not have to market to, you just are maintaining a relationship, and you know that you're going to get 5 hours or 10 hours or 20 hours of work a week. And right now I actually have 5 anchor clients where I know every month I'm writing 2 stories for Fortune. Every month I'm doing 3 blog posts for the nonprofit I ghostwrite for. And that is such a comfort because I know I'm going to pay my base expenses, I know I'm going to be busy, and I don't have to be panicked about filling my time and take assignments or projects that aren't right for me. So these are some different types of anchor client that you might have. It could be writing a newsletter or a column. It could be a part-time editing or production job you go into 2 days a week. It could be a part-time non-journalism job that you go into. I always used to think it would be great to be a receptionist at an apartment building because you could just sit there and write and check people in. But things like that can help you get started as a freelancer, or even be that cushion you need when the other assignments are kind of ebbing and flowing. A regular blogging gig, a contributing editor position, a book contract potentially could be that anchor client, although from what I understand the advances are less and less every year, and they're really not necessarily something to count on for your expenses. And if you're just getting started, it could be a severance package. It could be a spouse with a steady job, or some kind of savings cushion that can give you the lead time that you need. It always amazes me when people say, oh, I'm just freelancing for a little bit, maybe 6 months or so until I get a full-time job. Because let me tell you, the first 6 months as a freelancer are the hardest. If you're going to pick 6 months to freelance, don't do the first 6 months. Do the middle. Take years 6 to year 7. If you're looking for a full-time job, look for a full-time job. Anyone who's job hunted knows that is enough to keep you busy. If you have something amazing that falls in your lap as a freelancer, of course, take it. But it's very hard to get up and running with steady clients who pay well. So, if you're hoping to be a full-time freelancer, commit to that, just as you would commit to a job hunt. And then grant fellowship. There's some amazing fellowships out there. Actually, I got a Facebook message from the Institute for Investigative Journalism about a $5,000 fellowship that they're offering to fund freelance investigative reporters. So there's a lot of different opportunities if there's one story that you're hoping to pursue. There's fellowships on poverty, there's fellowships on kids, there's fellowships on international work that can fund specific projects. Okay, so question number 2 is setting your rate, which is another thing that people who aren't freelancers may say, oh gosh, we're talking about money. Isn't that awfully personal? Well, yeah, and it's important. If we don't talk about money, we may not make enough. So setting your rate, there's a lot of people who talk about the per word rate. So who here is a sort of mainly writer or mainly editor? If I could get like a writer, okay, an editor. Okay, and what about like broadcast or online? Okay, so you'll have lots of different ways that your rates are quoted. You might be paid per hour, you might be paid per word, you might be paid per page for editing, and whatever the rate you're quoted by a client, you want to translate it into your hourly rate. Because ultimately we are trading our time for money. We're not getting any equity in the media company that we're working for. So at the end of the day, the only thing we have is the cash that we received for our time. So don't get distracted by the per word rate or the per page rate for editing or the per project rate. Estimate the hours that you think this project's going to take, and then track your work so that you know if your estimate was right. So you know if you actually took on this this assignment, and it ended up being a good gig. So for example, people talk a lot about per word rates, and $1 a word is often considered a pretty good rate. So 50 cents a word might not be so great, but I'll tell you, I've worked for places for 50 cents a word, write an 800-word story. It takes me 3 hours to report and write, and maybe an hour to edit. So I'm making $100 an hour. Versus, I've also worked for wonderful magazines that pay $2, $3 a word, and I might write an 800-word story for them that goes through 6 edits, that gets I have to re-report 2 times, and I end up spending 30, 40 hours on it. So I end up making maybe $50 an hour for that. It's much more important if you're thinking about the pay on that 3 Ps matrix to focus on the hourly rate. I also have a checklist in your handout. Does everyone have a handout?
More handouts?
I think there was some in the front. I don't know if there's any more left there. In the front table outside the room. So I've developed this checklist for a new freelance client over the many mistakes that I made, the questions I didn't ask when I took on an assignment. So this is the product of sweat and tears and mistakes. So for every assignment I take on, you want to have a signed contract. And depending on the situation, if it's someone you know really well, you might be willing to start the work before you received the countersigned contract, but you should at least, in my opinion, look over the contract and see what is the scope of the assignment, what is the deadline, what are the terms or the rights, and how am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? So I like to have all those things in the signed contract. I also like to have some written documentation of the timeline and the number of revisions or edits of the project, because that's something that can really add to your time and expense, and anything else that you think isn't in there. And then the last bullet here, the verbal understanding, is just a conversation you have with your client about, okay, so here's the 1,000-word story I'm going to write for you. Do you think there's going to be any art? What's your fact-checking process like? Do you want me to provide data for graphics? If you know all of the additional things you're going to be asked to do, then you'll have a much better sense of how long it's going to take you at the beginning of the project. So that's how you'll know. Yes?